Part 81. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 813. The previous chapter, White Father and White Mother, strictly speaking, is a very weak chapter, but Long wrote it very seriously. After dinner, he started deleting, revising, and revising it until he was satisfied with it. It was already dawn. This is the first time that the man and woman came into everyone's sight from a formal first-person perspective. Long considered many ways to appear, but after writing about it, he still chose this one. They are very powerful, and this has been laid out a lot before, so Long feels that if they still write and express themselves according to the usual way of writing their first appearance, they will always be afraid of writing them down. For example, if I write it according to the way a normal strong person appears, it seems that so much previous foreshadowing has been wasted, and I always feel that I am inferior. Long has also created some strong characters before, such as Blood Corpse and Su Fuegui, but unfortunately, they should be at a higher level than Su Fuegui. After writing them in an ordinary way, Long felt dissatisfied and directly deleted and rewritten them. So please don't be surprised that the chapters that were originally updated late at night were not written until the morning. Yesterday, I saw a reader leave a message saying that the broadcast is very good, much better than the original version of The Dragon, but it is too depressing. He is only willing to finish it, but will not watch it a second time. Indeed, even if Subai occasionally flips the table and gets sick, the book Terror Broadcast still cannot be regarded as a good novel. It can even be labeled as abuser and depressive. In the current trend of online novels, a book like this has not been read, and so many of you are actually reading it. It is indeed a breath of fresh air. It has been over a year since Terror Broadcast was published. Ever since it was first released, Long has published single chapters and said that this book does not compete for monthly subscriptions and that he just wants to finish the book quietly. If you don't fight for the monthly ticket, there will be no reason to update. The 2 updates every day also give Long time to think. Sometimes, when Long sees a reader tipping a lot, Long will cover his eyes and secretly laugh. I pretended not to see it and didn't thank him in the chapter. Maybe this could attract more rewards and income, but Long was worried that there would be problems in the plot if he coded words just for the sake of coding. In fact, many times, even if 2 updates a day is still a lot of pressure for Long. Doing something with your heart is really time-consuming and energy-consuming. This is not about complaining or showing pity. Long basically does not issue single chapters, because there is no fight for anything, and there is no need to specifically appeal for anything. The last 2 single chapters were one for hospitalization, one for leave, and one for getting a marriage certificate. The purpose of this single chapter is: Long knows that some readers may find the last chapter a bit confusing, but since readers who have followed this point should be considered true fans, from Long's perspective, they are all of the same kind, and I hope everyone can write about Long. I feel the same emotions in this chapter. If you read the previous chapter carefully, you probably won't feel it. Their official appearance also marks the book entering a new stage. After all, I have worked so hard to write something that I put more thought into than usual. If I see someone criticizing me, I always feel very sorry. Okay, the dragon went to sleep. Don't panic. Hug the dragon. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 814. Erhai Lake has recently been undergoing sewage treatment, so all nearby B/U0026Bs and INs have been ordered to suspend operations. This has naturally caused complaints from B/U0026B owners, but they have complained and scolded them, and then they can take a short vacation for themselves. Well deserved some downtime. For people in the service industry, when most people are on vacation, they are busier. When making money and working have become a habit, sometimes wanting to stop and decompress yourself will cause a sense of guilt. I just kept gritting my teeth and kept doing it. The tenacity of the Chinese people can be clearly reflected at this point. Furthermore, most of the B/U0026BS and inns on Erhai Lake are small in size, so basically the bosses and hostesses of each of them use themselves as small workers. B/U0026BS rely on word of mouth, and sometimes it is better to do things yourself than to hire people. Be more confident when doing things. This morning, the proprietress of this inn was sitting on a wicker chair in the yard, reading a magazine and drinking tea. Her husband, who is the owner here, took advantage of this time to go back to his hometown. The waiter hired by the inn, everyone is on vacation during this period, so the landlady herself can relax. However, although the inn was closed, it was not empty of guests. At this moment, two monks came out of the room on the second floor. One was wearing an orthodox Central Plains monk cassock, and the other was wearing a lama suit. Putting aside their conversation, the appearance of these two monks alone is enough to make people think that they are eminent monks, and naturally they deserve to be treated as monks here. The landlady confiscated the room fee and simply let them stay overnight. Even if the boss came to check and found that she had guests, she would not pursue it too much if she saw that she was just taking in two monks. Everyone can understand that it is a good thing to borrow on weekdays. The monk and the Buddha thanked the proprietress together, and then left the place. On the bed in the room, the monk left enough money for the room fee. Every drink and peck had its own cause and effect. Moreover, the monk was not a monk who was so poor that he needed alms. The two slowly strolled along the Erhai Lake, looking at the beautiful scenery and chatting about Buddhist scriptures. This was something they often did when they lived in Lao Fang's house. Therefore, during the time when Subai left Fatty and walked away, even if only the two of them live in the house, they won't feel bored. Fatty didn't live with them, not because it was inconvenient for Fatty to stay in a closed inn, but because he went to Dali City specifically to find some fun. Fatty never denied his hobby, and he didn't deny it at all. Don't cover up. After chatting about the scriptures for a while, Buddha stopped by the Erhai Lake and changed the topic. Is it true that you can't break through that formation? Also, the woman's behavior of directly finding the formation and opening it to enter actually fell into the eyes of the Buddha and the monks in the distance. This place of enlightenment is actually equivalent to a sieged city, and the people inside want to get out. And people outside want to come in. The Buddha also did not hide his yearning for the place of enlightenment. You must know that there are tombstones left by the enlightened people of all generations. That is the most eye-catching wealth, even for an outsider like himself. Not exempt from vulgarity. This is fate and luck. In fact, the poor monk feels that Dabai does not want to stay in that place. The ground is full of tombstones and the underworld is desolate. At best, he is called a guardian. At worst, he is actually a tomb keeper. As for the formations, neither the poor monk nor the fat man can do anything about it for the time being. In fact, the fat man has been exposed to and practiced too many things, so his attainments in formations can be regarded as excellent, but formations are not his main area of expertise after all. Otherwise, together with the advanced monk, the two of them should be able to give it a try with a 30% to 40% certainty. But you're still waiting, Gyatso smiled. Others don't know, but as a monk, how can I not know this old friend's plan? Kilv's heart is too big. He is not willing to only use his soul or body as a single advancement to lead the other to advance together. He is waiting for an opportunity, waiting for the chi machine for his body and soul to advance at the same time. As the saying goes, comparing people to each other will make people angry. When others are stuck at the peak of the senior level, they are trying their best to rely on opportunities to advance to the advanced audience level. However, Kilv is planning slowly and unhurriedly. Like having obsessive-compulsive disorder, feeling dissatisfied if you don't achieve 100%. Are there any monks you know here in Yunnan? Gyatso asked. Yes, the monk nodded, but I just came here half a year ago, and we met and talked about old times. This time, there is no need to contact him again. The mountains and rivers here are good. It would be good to stay with Dabai here for a while. It's a pity that we can't go in. Otherwise, we can bring some condolences to Dabai. After saying this, Gyatso's own lips showed a smile unconsciously. It's probably really boring in there. However, at this moment, the smile at the corner of Gyatso's mouth slowly solidified, because the water in front of him rippled with a layer of strange ripples, because the ripples centered on a point and presented a kind of shape to the surroundings. The folded and orderly waves are pushed out, and this order is simply too deliberate, and it looks like it has been carefully carved. Perhaps ordinary people would not notice this, but how could the Buddha, who has advanced to a high-level audience, not see this? Buddha immediately stretched out his hand and motioned the monk to step back. If it was a crisis at the senior audience level, then the current monk really did not have the ability to respond and participate. The monk didn't show any force and backed away obediently. While the monk was retreating, a woman's face suddenly appeared in the clear water of high lake. The woman's face is very delicate, with a yellowish to black complexion. When the woman comes out of the water, her hair is wet and draped on her shoulders, like a hibiscus out of water, but the layer on the woman's face looks like it has been waxed. The weird luster unfortunately ruined this atmosphere. When her face emerged from the water, the woman's eyes slowly opened. All white. Nothing black at all. In an instant, it was as if the clouds in the sky were suppressed at this moment, and the surrounding airflow also formed a terrifying whirlpool in an instant. This was the aura of the woman, with a sonorous tone that was like no one else. When the woman's entire body emerged from the water and she stood barefoot on the water, both the monk and Gyatso showed a look of slight surprise on their faces. Buddha! Buddha! As monks who worship the Buddha, although there are differences in the Buddhist tradition between Buddha and Gyatso, it is undeniable that they are still inherited from the same lineage. Moreover, both of them have extensive knowledge and are very familiar with Buddhism in various countries and regions. And India is naturally the most important. This woman's appearance and clothing at this time and her aura when she appeared are clearly manifestations of the arrival of the Bodhisattva. The female bodhisattvas in many temples in India are basically exactly the same as her. Of course, many female bodhisattvas in Chinese temples are actually also known to the Chinese. Human aesthetics has changed the image. In other words, this is a female bodhisattva. Of course, it can also be said that she is an audience member who has cultivated herself into a female bodhisattva. I want him. The woman pointed at the monk behind Gyatso and directly stated her purpose of coming, because the Lama who stood between her and her target made the woman feel an aura of fear. You are not the audience here. Buddha did not answer the woman's request for the monk, because this did not require an answer. It was naturally impossible for Buddha to give the monk to the woman to take away. And Buddha certainly did not ask the woman if she was a local listener in Yunnan, but whether she was from China. Audience. The woman smiled slightly and did not answer Buddha's question. Immediately, she raised her hand. Then, the woman's originally compassionate face turned into a ferocious evil spirit in an instant, and all the light around her was sucked in at this moment, as if a huge black hole was devouring everything here. Pretend to be a ghost. Buddha immediately shouted, raised up with one hand, a hatchet appeared in his hand, and chopped it down directly. With a crash, a hole was cut in the surrounding darkness, and the light from the outside entered again. However, the black color was like ink that soaked the opened hole back again. A white hand stretched out from the darkness and appeared behind the monk. At this moment, a Buddhist mark began to appear between the eyebrows of the monk who had not originally planned to join the battle group. Buddha, who had just tried to split the shady curtain but failed to achieve any actual results, appeared next to the monk, grabbed the woman's hand with one hand, and at the same time scolded the monk. Can't you trust me, Chi LV? I can protect you. You don't need to be promoted at this time. Besides, the fat man is in the city. I don't believe he dared not roll off the woman after sensing the energy fluctuation here. Hearing this, the mark on the monk's brow slowly disappeared, and then he smiled bitterly and said, "It just suddenly became a burden, which is always a bit embarrassing." The Buddha's hand was entangled with the woman's hand, but at the same time, countless white hands appeared from the black screen. Most of them grabbed the Buddha, but a small part tried to continue to attack the monk. Faced with these difficult hands, Buddha did not take a hatchet to chop them one by one. Instead, in an instant, the Buddhist aura on his body disappeared. Immediately afterwards, the filth, disaster, mania, etc. belonged to the devil. The breath rose from his body. With Buddha's body as the center, a layer of gray symbolizing disaster began to actively saturate the surrounding darkness, and the white jade hands protruding from the black curtains in all directions began to rot and haggard after being stained by the gray, and then began a series of it only turned into withered bones and fell down. Buddha took this opportunity to let out a sharp roar, and the hatchet in his hand combined with the demonic body blessed by Qin Bing's physical body to forcefully push forward. Snapped. The surrounding darkness finally broke at this moment. The female bodhisattva was still standing on the water, but there was a clear wound on the ring finger of her left hand. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 815. The face of the female bodhisattva was slightly gloomy. She actually had a solemn appearance, but one could still feel her rising anger. Standing opposite her, the Buddha who had just successfully intercepted her and kidnapped the monk was also standing opposite her. His eyes narrowed slightly, because Lord Buddha didn't know what this woman's purpose was in kidnapping the monk. At the same time, this woman actually dared to bear the consequences of the broadcast's punishment and take action. Of course, it is very possible that this female bodhisattva just wants the monk, but not to kill him, so even if she bears the karma, the punishment will not be too severe, but no matter what, it is impossible for the Buddha to let this woman not say hello. Under the premise, he took away the monks around him. There was no fear on the face of the monk standing there. He seemed to have never been afraid, but at this moment, the speed of the beads held between his fingers was undoubtedly much faster than usual. Maybe it was because he needed his former companions to come. Protection doesn't help at all, so even a monk with a mind like a monk will be affected by some waves. After all, this feeling is indeed not very good. The female bodhisattva's eyes gradually shifted from the monk to the Buddha. Through the previous confrontation, she understood one thing, that is, if she wanted to capture the monk, she must first defeat the Lama in front of her. It's just that in this way, it seems that my own cause and effect is a little bigger. However, the female bodhisattva seemed to have made up her mind. She walked slowly from the water, swaying her hands gently, but her vision became blurred for a while. It seemed that there were countless hands waving around her at this moment, and there were also people all around. Sanskrit sounds gradually sounded. Something called enlightenment or something called belief is unfolding, and the target is Buddha. In ancient times, there were civil and military battles, and the same was true between monks. Throughout the ages, Chinese temples must have had warrior monks to intimidate Xiao Xiao to protect the temple industry, and there were also real eminent monks in charge, who specializes in teaching Buddhism and theory to foreign monks. If the former is defeated, it means that the temple's property may be infringed, while if the latter is defeated, it means that the temple's orthodoxy and standard will be reduced. She wants to lower the punishment for broadcasting, the monk reminded, ignore her. The female bodhisattva wanted to deal with Gyatso in front of her, so she chose this way of paying homage to the Buddha. This way of duel is actually quite dangerous, no less than a duel of souls, because whichever party loses their faith or suffers damage, then that person's state of mind is likely to be it will also collapse. And if there is a duel in this way, it can be interpreted as two people confirming each other's understanding and insights of Buddha. On the broadcast side, it can indeed reduce a lot of cause and effect. Even without the monk's reminder, Buddha would not sit here and discuss Taoism with this female bodhisattva. Even though the scenery here is nice, and even though Buddha is very confident in his own faith, he did not make such a choice that would benefit the other party. The other party is very mysterious, and sometimes mystery also means a kind of power, but the other party is not strong enough to push him away in one fell swoop. It is completely different from the previous woman who entered the place of enlightenment alone. Waves of Sanskrit sounds sounded from beside the female bodhisattva, and the flowers and trees on the shore seemed to take on new life at this time, becoming increasingly green. Buddha, on the other hand, was holding a hatchet in his hand, as if he was not paying attention at all. Finally, when one of the female bodhisattva's bare feet had just landed on the shore, the Buddha moved. He had appeared in front of the female bodhisattva before, and just pushed out a hatchet. A showdown between truly strong men, unless it was a high-level audience specializing in physical training, would rarely happen again. A scene of hundreds of rounds, and everyone's fighting methods have become simpler and more time-effective due to the accumulation of experience that comes with the improvement of levels. For example, in the beginning, when everyone was a low-level listener or an ordinary listener, they would still make use of terrain or various other external factors to increase their chances of victory or survival during battles. But at this stage, external factors can only play a role. The interference is really very small, and it can even be said to be ignored. What we fight for is purely our own hard power. Fo's sword was pushed straight forward. He was waiting for the other party's reaction to decide his next reaction. After all, Fo, who had advanced with his soul, had merged with Qin Bing's physical body. Although he is a recently promoted senior audience member, but his combat power cannot be underestimated. However, what surprised Buddha was that until the blade of his hatchet was close to the opponent's body, and even beyond the distance that the opponent could use a protective weapon or gang chi to defend, the opponent still did not react at all. Suddenly, Buddha seemed to understand something suddenly, and the monk behind him was also slightly stunned at this time. Obviously, both monks understood something. But it was too late. Because what the other party is using is conspiracy. Puff. The Buddha's hatchet pierced the chest of the female bodhisattva, but no blood flowed out of the female bodhisattva. Even her face was still solemn, and it seemed that the pain could not cause her any trouble at all. However, at this moment, the reflection of the female bodhisattva on the surface of her high lake slowly solidified, turning from a flat surface into a three-dimensional one. An identical woman emerged from the water and slowly stood up. The female bodhisattva who was stabbed by the Buddha slowly knelt down and sat down, which caused the Buddha to also kneel down and sit down. What the Buddha stabbed was not his true body, but his Dharma God. The Dharma God contained the female bodhisattva's understanding and perception of the Buddha. Therefore, the Buddha's knife will naturally not pierce blood, but it is an active provocation. When you penetrate someone else's Dharma God, they will naturally drag you into a duel for enlightenment. To put it nicely, it's like sitting down and discussing things. To put it worse, it means one person uses his or her own worldview to attack another person's worldview. In essence, it is even more cruel than real physical fighting. He has actually retained his strength. The newly emerged female bodhisattva smiled slightly. Although her face was a little gloomy and her body seemed a little empty, even if she separated her Dharma God to plunge the Buddha into a situation of discussing Taoism, her current self could capture a senior person. It still can't be considered a difficulty. The monk put his hands together and recited Amitabha. The other party's methods are indeed amazing. The monk thought that even if he and Buddha were to change positions, he would probably be fooled by this trick. However, before being captured, The monk seemed to want to satisfy his curiosity. "Can you tell this poor monk why you want to take this poor monk away?" The female bodhisattva did not answer. In her eyes, the monk was already a turtle in the urn. Even if the monk could be promoted to a senior audience at this time, it would take some time, and she could stop the robbery at any time. The Buddha and the bodhisattva were sitting and worshipping the Buddha on the side. Even though they knew that they had been tricked, they did not dare to be distracted. The slightest mistake would probably be the end of their fate. When the female bodhisattva's hand was about to touch the monk, a red light suddenly appeared, and then a red sky thunder suddenly fell from the sky. The female bodhisattva swatted away the red light with one hand, but she did not dare to ignore the sky thunder. She had to step back more than 10 meters and spread her hands. When the sky thunder fell, her body became a conductor, completely leading the sky thunder. In the Urhai lake, silver snakes danced wildly on the surface of the Urhai lake. Soon, a large area of electrocuted fish and shrimps floated on the water. The monk frowned slightly. The other party's move was obviously to divert the thunder away to prevent himself from being harmed. It was obvious that the other party did not want to kill him, and even deliberately protected himself from being harmed, but the other party wanted to take him away. "What is your purpose? Hey, female bodhisattva, do you want to capture my master so that he can go to the west to obtain Buddhist scriptures?" The chubby fat man had already arrived, and a red peachwood sword flashed beside him. He had also guided the thunder just now. The female bodhisattva was a little hesitant. This time, she was really hesitant, because her Dharma god originally wanted to hold back the Buddha, but now that a high-level audience appeared on the other side to help, her Dharma god was actually held back by the Buddha. And when I wanted to summon the Dharma god back, I could feel that the Buddha seemed to be actively entangled in him, indicating that he was discussing the Tao regardless of day or night. Having lost the support of the Dharma god, the female bodhisattva did not have much confidence in facing another high-level audience with her own strength. But the next moment, the female bodhisattva looked at the monk and said seriously, "Follow me, I'll help you advance." "It's a joke, my master needs your help to advance." The fat man walked up to the monk, reached out and patted the monk's shoulder, meaning don't be afraid, the fat man is covering you. At this moment, the female bodhisattva sighed slightly, and took one last look at the monk with some nostalgia. She seemed a little regretful, but she still said to the Buddha over there, "Let me go." This was a sign of surrender and she chose to leave. Buddha did not choose to let go of his Dharma god. The fat man curled his lips and said, "You think this is B, you can come and go as you please." After finishing speaking, the fat man showed a handful of chess pieces in his hands, and then threw the chess pieces into the air. This meant that he was preparing to arrange a formation to completely leave the female bodhisattva behind. But soon, the smug smile on the fat man's face solidified, because when he was about to arrange the formation, 3 more people appeared on the muddy ground around them, in the reed swamps, and in the water of Urhai Lake on the other side. Bodhisattvas of different genders. "Damn it, brother-asan, how many people are here?" the fat man couldn't help but panic. The 2-on-1 situation suddenly turned into 4-on-2. "Damn it, what does this mean? Why didn't you come out just now?" But the monk reminded at this time, "They are more panicked than us." Indeed, although the 4 bodhisattvas were solemn in appearance, they looked particularly solemn, and there was even a faint hint of fear, because they had noticed that somewhere in the dark, a wisp of consciousness belonging to the Chinese big-shot audience had swept towards them. "Here." One of the bodhisattvas immediately spoke. "Quick victory." Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 816. The turmoil outside will naturally not affect the inside. Even if it has involved audiences in other areas and even vaguely attracted the attention of a big boss, once entering the place of enlightenment, it basically means being isolated from the world, even if, for example, the woman in front can open the formation on her own and come in, but as the guardian here, even if she has the ability to open the formation, she cannot get out. This is a rule, a silent rule, a rule set by the broadcast. In fact, in other words, the place of enlightenment can really be regarded as a peach blossom garden, but just as Subai explained before that the peach blossom garden is a ghost story, looking at the tombstones and underworld in the place of enlightenment, it seems that only in this ghostly place can one truly find peace in a pure sense. Those who like to post a few pictures on their WeChat moments and talk about going to Tibet to purify their souls cannot experience the true peace that true believers experience without kowtow. When Subai came back from studying the tombstones for a day, he saw Hill sitting next to the coffin. His body was still half twisted, which looked very inconsistent. However, after a few days, even if Subai had sucked blood and essence, but he still recovered some of his energy. At least, he was able to move his body on his own. Seeing Subai walking back as if nothing was wrong, Hills showed a mixture of emotions on his face, ranging from resentment to envy. Of course, the most overwhelming thing was helplessness. "Why do you act like a resentful woman?" Subai sat down next to Hills. He asked Hills yesterday if he wanted to teleport back to the place of enlightenment in the West, but Hills refused first. Anyway, he could only sit like this when he got there. "It's better to just sit here and at least have the cat and Subai by your side." Counting the time, Hills is not far away from the next story world. Of course, the same goes for Subai. After all, the last time Subai entered was just the Cinderella story world that he returned to by using the reward qualification he had obtained before. It is not a story world arranged by broadcast. People really can't stop. A little-known thinker in the West once said that once people stop, they will easily have random thoughts, become decadent, and lose their goals. Hills said very calmly. "I guess that thinker's name is Hills," Subai said. "Can you guess this?" Subai shrugged. "Actually, there is no difference between stopping and not stopping. I think you may have stayed in the place of enlightenment for a long time, and then spent 10 days in this disabled state, so I thought it's too much all at once. You are very open-minded." "I can't help it, I'm forced to do it." The two of them were leaning against the coffin, chatting without a word. After a while, their expressions suddenly changed at the same time. Subai grabbed his chest with his left hand, while Hills could only bite it. The teeth are pointed upward. Fortunately, this pain disappeared quickly. "Haha," Subai laughed, "if nothing else happens, we should be together in this story world." This may be the embodiment of the bad taste of broadcasting. Subai can conclude that if Hills had not had itchy hands to open the bronze mirror, or had not had itchy feet to teleport to his own place of enlightenment, if he and 11 he doesn't know Hills yet, so the probability that he will meet Hills in the next story world is basically low to none. But this time, if nothing else goes wrong, it should be two people entering the same story world. Subai reached out from the coffin and took out his cell phone, which had long been out of battery. Haha, it had power again inexplicably, and the official account message screen of Kongbu66 appeared directly on the screen without unlocking it. Looking at the 0% battery level displayed on the phone's display, Subai was a little dissatisfied and said, "Broadcasting is too stingy. Why don't you recharge the battery so that I can play mobile games for a while?" Hills didn't have his cell phone with him, so he just asked Subai, "What story world are you and I together?" Subai clicked on the latest graphic message. The cover was a picture of a living room, and the title was Zhao's Villa. There was no task introduction in the graphic message, but there was a list of listeners who participated in the task. There were a total of 9 people. The names of the other 7 people are all shown as asterisks here. Only his own name and Hills's name are visible. "It's true, let's go into the next story world together." Subai reached out and knocked on the lid of the coffin, and said, "Judging from the illustrations, this should be a secret room type story world." While talking, Subai handed the mobile phone screen to Hills. Poor Hills found it difficult to even hold the phone. There was no other way, so Subai could only do it for him. A title, a list, and a picture. Hills indicated that he had finished reading, and then looked at Subai. Want to chat? Generally speaking, there will be a notice on the broadcast before entering the story world. It may be a week or 2 weeks in advance, or it may be just 1 or 2 days in advance. Of course, if you have committed a crime recently, you may not receive this treatment. Subai once said, when eating wontons, I entered the story world before a mouthful of wontons fell into my mouth. Another time, I fell into the story world while lying on the bed and fell asleep. Audiences who receive the notice will think and speculate through the advance notice broadcast, which is a preview of the experience, and will not be caught off guard as soon as they enter the story world. If there are other listeners around, you can also exchange opinions with each other. Low-level listeners or ordinary listeners may also prepare some things in advance to prepare for the next story world. For example, if you are entering a supernatural story world, then exchange some more talisman paper and holy water, but if you want to get grenades or something more exaggerated, for example, it is impossible to bring a nuclear warhead into the story world. The broadcast will directly cancel the things that are not allowed to be brought into the story world. Nuclear warheads are no joke. These days, some powerful terrorist organizations can manage to obtain nuclear weapons, not to mention an audience that is almost like a god. You and I both enter, and this is Zhao's villa, a closed area, so it is likely to test mutual trust and people's hearts. Although the two of us have fought before, we have the same identity after all, and we have also faced intruders together. Or, so the broadcast lets us enter the story world in the hope of seeing scenes and plots of the two of us being suspicious of each other, and the broadcast will deliberately arrange some elements and rules to ensure that what it wants to see will appear. Hills nodded, acknowledging Subai's analysis, but he added, a narrow area seems a bit small for us advanced listeners, so the broadcast will probably set up everything in this villa. It has the attribute of indestructible. Even a teacup cannot be broken. And the number of people entering the story world this time is 9. The other party is most likely to be an advanced listener. Otherwise, if there are lower people joining, then the broadcast is likely to be it will seal our strength to achieve game balance. It doesn't matter whether it's sealed or not. Subai shook his head and said, broadcasting can't do much about sealing strength, otherwise what's the point of strengthening and becoming stronger? Of course, in this story world, it is very possible to happen, but I think the biggest possibility of broadcasting is to place our rules in the real world in this story world, and even strengthen it. We cannot attack other people for no reason, or even coerce others. Unless there are specific triggering conditions, this can solve the problem of imbalance in strength. Since it is a story that takes place in a limited space area, the broadcast will definitely have this arrangement. For example, if except Subai and Hills, the others are either high-level listeners, low-level listeners, senior listeners, or even ordinary listeners, Subai and Hills, the two guardians, directly joined forces to capture the rest of the people, tied them up, and threw them on the sofa in the living room. How could this be a story for the broadcast? If the area is relatively large, with a city or even a continent as the story world, then the weak can find more ways to deal with the strong, but if the area is limited, the weak have basically no scope to maneuver in front of the strong. No matter what, we can make an agreement in advance. If the conditions are right, we can trust each other first. The main thing is that the conditions are right, Hills said. This can be regarded as forming an offensive and defensive alliance before entering the story world. As long as the conditions are right, Subai agreed. Of course, he hasn't entered the story world yet, so the specific rules are not clear yet. It can only be regarded as a verbal agreement now. I even think that among these 9 people, there should be several groups of people, and each group of people knows and is familiar with each other, just like the two of us. Hills continued to analyze, with this trust, and it seems like one of the joys of broadcasting to have familiar relationships chopped up and tainted by the plot and rules of the story world. If you analyze beautiful things, they may not be so beautiful. Subai logged out of WeChat, but at this time, the phone screen went black. I also want to check if there is a case similar to Zhao's villa. A villa where 9 people have died, or a story world adapted from a headless mystery. Hills frowned, then relaxed, and said, "It seems that even in the East, broadcasters like to use ready-made mysteries from the real world to adapt and use. I have experienced some of the more famous cases in the country, such as the NTU corpse dismemberment case, the Zuling case, and the Northeastern cat-faced old lady case. How about you? I have experienced the Zodiac murders, Jack the Ripper, these more famous ones. It's a pity that radio seems to be a lover of horror and suspense." Subai sighed. "I know what you mean, if only radio was a fan of romantic aestheticism," Hills laughed. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 817. 4 Bodhisattvas from India, or in other words, high-level listeners from India, standing solemnly on the shore of Urhai Lake, is indeed a great scene. After all, at the level of high-level listeners, it can be said that things are rare and valuable. Unless there are special cases like Fatty Subai and the 4 of them have been living together before, other times when more than 3 high-level listeners gather in an area, it is usually because something happened. For example, what real-life mission was announced on the radio, or what secret realm was discovered by the senior people below. What's more, these 4 bodhisattvas from India are now in a foreign country. This kind of battle can indeed be said to be very adventurous and magnificent. Monk, aren't you the reincarnation of Jin Shanzi? The fat man joked beside him that although the situation at this time was very difficult, the fat man was not too worried. First of all, he did not believe that the other party would really dare to take advantage of the crowd to strangle him and the Buddha, unless the names of the 4 Indian bodhisattvas were all called Subai. Secondly, although Fatty has only been promoted to senior audience not long ago, Fatty also knows that in China, if senior audiences are rare and valuable, then boss-level listeners are rare, but most of them are from one province, or an area is divided into divisions like this. Subai went to England. Because Subai was weak at that time, the big guys in England and Western Europe naturally didn't care. But now, 4 Indian bodhisattvas suddenly appeared on the Urhai Lake in Yunnan in China. The fat man: "I don't believe there are no Chinese bosses around here who can sense it. It stands to reason that few listeners would do anything passionate to defend their country, but broadcasters should formulate such rules based on broadcast preferences, such as Japan, South Korea, China, India, and Western Europe, which have different cultural systems. Naturally, story worlds of different types and atmospheres can be designed to meet the diversified taste needs of broadcasters. Therefore, it is naturally impossible for broadcasters to accept the radiation influence of powerful areas and gradually assimilate nearby areas. This is equivalent to changing the original place. The Manchuhan banquet placed in front of the radio turned into a big pot of white rice. Seeing the fat man jokingly asking him if he was the reincarnation of Jin Shanzi, the monk directly replied, "Canopy, long time no see." The fat man gritted his teeth, smiled, and then spread out all the chess pieces in his hands, forming a defensive array. On the other side, the Dharma goddess of the female bodhisattva continued to drag the Buddha, causing the fat man to face the siege of 3 high-level listeners. Suddenly, the fat man licked his lips, feeling excited. These 4 Indian bodhisattvas obviously did not dare to stay too long. They knew that the appearance of the other 3 people must have attracted the attention of big men nearby in China, so they could only fight quickly and capture the killer monk. Escape as soon as possible. As long as you can leave China, no matter how angry the Chinese bosses are, there will be bosses on your side who will come forward to take care of you. The 3 bodhisattvas who appeared later, 2 men and 1 woman, appeared directly outside the fat man's magic circle, with their own magic weapons appearing in their hands. Without any nonsense or too much hesitation, they faced the fat man directly. The magic circle began to bombard in the most primitive and brutal way. Boom! 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 Under a series of bombardments, Fatty's eyes became more and more gloomy. The formation he carefully arranged had actually cracked at this time. It was obvious that it could not last long. Fatty knew that his first priority now was to delay time, but facing the rapid offensive of the three bodhisattvas, there are really not many methods available. Amitabha the monk took a deep breath. This time, he really planned to advance. Although he didn't know why the other party came all the way to catch him, the monk knew that the reason why the other party dared to come was because he was not a high-level person now. Audience. The monk clasped his hands together. Although it was obviously impossible to achieve the great perfection he imagined, at the moment, it was also the key to breaking the situation. There is no dzogchen in life. The monk sighed and said, "It's the poor monk who has taken the form." For a moment, the Buddhist mark between the monk's eyebrows began to emit golden light, and the entire body and soul began to sublimate at this time. The monk's primitive accumulation was enough, and he could even advance to the next level at any time, but he always wanted to wait until I was still progressing when I was perfect, so I put it off until now. Seeing that the monk was already advancing, the three bodhisattvas showed anxiety in their eyes. The next moment, the three of them used their own origins to integrate into the offensive. This really meant that they were willing to do whatever it took. The Buddha is still sitting and talking about Taoism and has no time to be distracted, but the fat man is so anxious that he wants to curse. He asked the monk jokingly before if you were the reincarnation of Jin Shanzi. That's why these Asen brothers want you so much, but now look at the three bodhisattvas who have squandered their origins. This damn thing is not the reincarnation of Jin Shanzi, but the reincarnation of Buddha is almost the same. Oh shit. The monk is advancing, and the fat man can only protect the Dharma, but facing three of them alone, facing three bodhisattvas who are almost crazy, the fat man is also unable to support himself, but the fat man's ruthlessness is revealed at this time. Perhaps the fat man before they only focus on calculations and interests, but after living together with monk Subai and Lord Buddha, everyone is actually changing each other. Fatty had almost killed Subai and the others in order to protect himself before. After that, Fatty realized that he was wrong. In fact, many times, if one is lucky enough to build an alliance among the audience, unless one's own interests are seriously damaged, the relationship that always helps each other under the premise of cooperation is so valuable. Thunder. The fat man sprayed a mouthful of blood on the peachwood sword, then pointed his finger to the sky, and the peachwood sword shot straight into the sky. Then, the fat man made a hand seal with his hands and chanted a spell quickly in his mouth. Then, 3 purple talisman papers automatically came out of the fat man's clothes. It flew out and stuck to Fatty's body. At this moment, Fatty's whole body suddenly became extremely sinister. This is attracting ghosts. Magic is actually a quantification. Just like during a war, how many tanks, aircraft, infantry, and military industries a country has are basically a quantification before the war begins. Even the enemy and we are very clear about each other, but after all, the war is not between two people. Hold a piece of paper and compare each other to see who has more aircraft and cannons. Otherwise, the German army during World War II would not have been able to use blitzkrieg to defeat France, which was not inferior to Germany in size. And drawing thunder is like making a small report to God. It means telling God that there is something evil here, and you should strike it with lightning to destroy it. The size of the thunder is related to the conduct of the person who draws the thunder. It is the aura emitted by the evil spirit that is sensed by God. At this time, the fat man first attracts the thunder, and then attracts the ghost himself. This is equivalent to pretending to be a ghost and dancing in front of God. You kill me, blah blah blah, you hit me to death, blah blah blah. Buzz. In the sky, a crimson blood cloud suddenly appeared, bringing a chilling pressure. At this moment, Fatty's defensive formation finally shattered, and the backlash shocked Fatty's body, and the pores all over his body were filled with blood. They all started to overflow with blood, but the fat man didn't care at all at this time and yelled, "Damn it, monk, I'll pay back the favor I cheated on you this time." The fat man still remembered that incident in his heart. That time, he knew that a few lamas would not kill him, so he allowed them to subdue him. As a result, the monk and the Buddha burned the Dharma god and tried their best. If Dabai hadn't rushed out with one breath, surrounded by thousands of ghosts, it is very likely that the three of them died there. Chi Lu, who was being promoted, had a smile on his lips. The three bodhisattvas broke the fat man's formation and were about to rush in, but they saw the mountain of flesh in front of them rushing towards them like crazy. At the same time, the fat man slapped his Tianling cap hard, and a wisp of essence and blood was released, forming a blood mist appeared, and he and the three bodhisattvas were trapped in it. This is to repay a favor, not to prove one's ambition by dying. Fatty still knows this, so Fatty does this to drag the third brother bodhisattva to bear the thunder with him. In the past, if Fatty had done this, the three bodhisattvas could have retreated, and the thunder would only hit Fatty. However, because they had just used their own origin to attack Fatty's formation, the surroundings were filled with them. The original smell is like a dog peeing on a telephone pole. The dog is gone, but the dog smell is still so pungent. At that moment, three red thunderbolts as thick as the roots of a big tree descended, pointing directly at the fat man and the three bodhisattvas below. At this moment, unless these three bodhisattvas believed that the monk was more important than their own lives, they had only one choice left. But fortunately, they chose the latter between the monk and their own death. The three bodhisattvas immediately gritted their teeth, and their dharma images were shattered as a result. They raised their hands above their heads, gathered lotus flowers on their heads, and prepared to resist the three thunderbolts. After finishing all this, the fat man sat down on the ground sickly. Now, he can only hope that these three Asin brothers can help with this thunder, otherwise he, the fat man, will definitely end up being punished by heaven and earth. However, at this moment, a change occurred. When the Buddha was worshipping the Buddha with the female bodhisattva who appeared at the beginning, and when the fat man implicated the other third brother bodhisattva in one breath. Next to the monk who was making advanced steps, an old woman suddenly appeared. The old woman was wearing Indian national costume and was staring at the monk gloomily. At the same time, she extended her hand. "It's really hard to catch you." No one expected that in order to capture a monk, 5 bodhisattvas from India were dispatched at once. But when the old woman's hand was about to touch the mark between the monk's eyebrows, it suddenly froze. Yes, not only the hand, but even the old woman's body froze, unable to move at all. A voice sounded faintly from all around. "It seems, a bit too much. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 818. Shanghai has not yet come out of the rainy season. It has rained a lot, which makes people feel a little upset. By the swimming pool of the eastern suburbs villa, Liang Sen is still sitting there reading the newspaper and drinking coffee as usual. He doesn't care. What big news? Because for people at their level, it is difficult to find news that interests them in the real world. But what Liang Sen likes is the atmosphere of sitting by the pool and reading the newspaper. Of course, it would be better if this rainy day could end early. Xie Zhen, dressed in a burgundy suit, walked out of the room. He seemed to always be obsessive-compulsive about what he wore. For example, his boss only wore loose pajamas now, but he even wore a tie. To be meticulous, it has to be said that these are two completely different attitudes towards life. This is the news I just received. Wang Kaiming of Yunnan sent a notice to the rest of the big guys in the country through the backend authority of the public account, saying that he learned about a situation. Several high-level listeners from India have recently come to his territory. It means I want any big boss including you, boss, to take the time to take a look. Xie Zhen is Liang Sen's assistant. Not only in the game company, Liang Sen actually leaves many things to him. Even the backend authority of his own public account is given to Xie Zhen to help him take care of it. Ah! Liang Sen just responded softly and took a sip of coffee. Boss, why doesn't Wang Kaiming go there himself? He is the big boss guarding Yunnan. Xie Zhen was obviously a little confused about this. He has been in seclusion recently. It seems that he has almost discovered the secrets in the Yunnan Worm Valley. The guy locked himself up as a bug. He is probably waiting for the moment of breaking out of the cocoon and being reborn. You let him do this, it is obviously impossible for small things to come out in advance. Unless the big boss from India has crossed the line, he really doesn't have the time to take care of just a few high-level listeners. So that's it? Xie Zhen nodded thoughtfully. He didn't ask his boss if he was willing to make a trip. After all, Yunnan is half of China's distance from Shanghai. It was indeed too far, and his boss wasn't that far. He is a person who likes to take care of things, and he knows this better than anyone else. It's okay, someone will take care of it. If it's Yunnan, then the guy from Guizhou shouldn't be able to sit still. Liang Sen showed a smile at the corner of his mouth, and then said lightly, those Indians came over for some unknown reason. Oh no, it is said that the listeners over there call the high-level listeners bodhisattvas. Haha, those bodhisattvas are probably going to be in bad luck. Guizhou, Xie Zhen recalled some information in his mind, and then said, the big boss in Guizhou, his name is Zhao Bianan, right? Yes, it's Zhao Bianan. Since Wang Kaiming said that several Indian bodhisattvas are coming, then Zhao Bianan will definitely not be able to sit still. Unless they happen to be in the story world, they will definitely go. Why? Xie Zhen asked. Zhao Bianan's grandfather died in the 62-year self-defense counterattack against India. His father also died in an accident while guarding the Sino-Indian border. Ji Zhen pursed his lips, looking a little emotional. Hey, what a coincidence! Liang Sen reached out and flicked a news item in the newspaper. The Indians on the border over there seem to be causing trouble again, and the bodhisattva from here came over. Drink. On the green slope, a man wearing a white vest handed a bottle of drink to the woman. If Fatty were to see this woman here, he would definitely be so shocked that his eyes would pop out. Isn't this the same woman who went to Lagu Lake to find him and then asked him to drive to Dali? The woman hesitated for a moment, seeming to be thinking about how to deal with the relationship between herself and the man in front of her. It is obvious that the person who needs the woman to think about the relationship cannot be a weak person. After a while, the woman took the drink and took a sip. Have you gone to the place of enlightenment? The man sat on the ground. His clear facial contours looked very three-dimensional under the Dali sunshine. He was a man who was nearly 40 years old, which is generally speaking, he was an uncle. He hasn't looked old yet, but his youthfulness has long since disappeared, giving people a mature and stable feeling. Naturally, a vest cannot cover the powerful muscles all over his body. The man is not tall or big, but the whole person gives people an extremely tough feeling. The woman did not sit down like the man. Facing the man's question, she just nodded silently. If I remember correctly, news leaked out a while ago that the guardian of the place of enlightenment has been replaced. The man said sadly, the original guardian of the place of enlightenment, Su Fuegui, is taking over. After he came out, he dug up his wife's urn and died. The man still remembered the fat man who stood up from the coffin and nodded gently to him when he was preaching. At that time, he sensed an aura in that person that made him feel very depressed. But such a strong man didn't know that he was actually dead long ago. He didn't realize it until he left the place of enlightenment and regained his freedom, but then he returned to dust and disappeared. His ending is really surprising. There's a new person, and his name is Subai, the woman replied. She felt that maybe the man in front of her didn't know who Subai was, because no matter what Subai's life experience was, Subai was just a high-level listener after all. It's just a beginner level, so naturally it won't be able to get into the eyes of this big boss. I know this. What is a bit surprising is that this man seems to have known about Subai for a long time. The child of Su Yuhang and Lu Menjiao, haha, an experimental product made by the two of them back then. It is said that he is a very interesting guy. After speaking, the man pointed at his head. The woman smiled slightly. In front of this man, she didn't need to hide anything. She said directly, there is indeed some mental illness. Because I can't stop me from taking the tombstones out, I am going to smash all the tombstones in the place of enlightenment. Oh, he, the man laughed. Have you ever experienced despair? Certainly. The story world is often filled with despair. And he grew up in despair, the man said with a smile. Actually, your current strength is no worse than that of the enlightened person, but you can't get over that hurdle. Maybe, you can learn from him. The higher we go, the more we think of ourselves as gods and the more we think of ourselves as nobles. In fact, because the higher the strength, the higher the survival rate in the story world, but in essence, we are worse than ordinary people. The higher we go, the easier it is to forget that we are actually just a group of desperados. You mean, he was actually betting against me at that time? Maybe, it's possible that if you persist until the end, he will be the first to give in. The woman was silent for a while and said, there are some Indians over there, aren't you going to go down? Wait a moment, the man was still sitting on the grass, looking very calm. Wait until they seriously injured those two people, or even killed them. The woman seemed to know the life experience of the man in front of her named Zhao Bianan. In fact, the woman and Zhao Bianan were from the same era, but Zhao Bianan had already confirmed she was still stuck there. In some story worlds about state of mind, radio often tortures you with your most unbearable past. Therefore, basically people of the same era have very secrets between them. It's really a secret. Why do you say that? Zhao Bianan looked at the woman with some confusion. Chen, are you? I am surprised that you think so. I'm not surprised, because we know each other very well. This woman's name is Chen, are you? I can understand your resentment towards that country. It may be due to the restriction of broadcasting, or it may be that you yourself disdain to send the anger is transferred to ordinary Indians, and the latter may be more likely to suffer. However, I think the audience from India seems to be a good outlet for your anger. You have no psychological burden to take action against them. Even if they cross the line and cause trouble, as one of the big guys guarding the southwest, you are justified in taking action. Why do you say I deliberately waited for those people to die before taking action? Zhao Bianan asked. Because of this, you have a reason to kill them instead of just expelling them, Chen Ryu replied, and the reason why you don't do it now is because you are waiting for that moment. Zhao Bianan shook his head. Maybe this is the reason why you haven't advanced yet. Sometimes it is too easy to blind one's eyes when looking at things. I am sitting here waiting, not because I want to wait for those few Indian bodhisattvas to make mistakes. Killing people gives me a reason to punish them. I just feel that it is not time for me to take action. After all, fighting with opponents of the same level is also a very valuable experience for those people. Why? Chen Ryu obviously couldn't understand. Why? At this time, Zhao Bianan stood up slowly. He had already predicted that the situation had begun to tilt. The reason is very simple. You should know that my grandfather died in the war against India in 1962. During the self-defense counterattack, my father later died on the southern Tibetan border. Why did they sacrifice? The purpose is nothing more than to be able to block the enemy in front of the country and keep the enemy outside the country's gate. If it were an audience from another country, I would probably be too lazy to pay attention, too lazy to be a good person, and not even interested in helping. But since this time it's an Indian. Can I watch them cross the border and kidnap people from our own side or kill people from our own circle? Although this reason is very naive for people at our level, since we are alive, we have to stick to something. As soon as he finished speaking, Zhao Bianan's figure disappeared on the spot. Only Chen Ryu was still standing there, looking thoughtful. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 819. Tick-tock, 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 tick-tock. Drops of blood were dripping from Sudbai's fingertips, and a pool of bright red had gathered in front of him. This was Sudbai's promise to Hills before he completed it. How much blood he sucked, in front of his eyes. The faces returned. But Hills on the side was not very moved, because there were only 10 minutes left before the two of them entered the next story world. In other words, even if Sudbai cut himself into several pieces, block, as long as you die, as long as you are not dead, you will be able to fully recover after entering the story world in another 10 minutes. What Sudbai did was more like perfunctory than fulfilling his previous promise. After a long time, the pale Sudbai almost lay down on the steps, while Hill slowly closed his eyes, because there was only the last count left to enter the story world. Sudbai also slowly closed his eyes. This was his second story world after he became an advanced listener. However, in fact, the last one-day prison story world had its own punishment nature and there might also be a broadcast. The reason for attacking Su Yuhang is included, so it cannot be regarded as a complete story world. There is no interaction, no participation from other audiences. The Fat Man and Buddha who appear are just cloned NPCs. The difficulty of that kind of story world is naturally very high, but your goal is actually very simple, it is just you. Once other people appear and participate, in the story world, things can be a lot more complicated. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. There was still the sound of dripping water, but it was heavier than when his blood dripped before. At the same time, the surrounding air seemed to be completely squeezed out. Sudbai slowly opened his eyes. He found that he was locked in a cage, and the cage was full of culture fluid, and tubes were inserted into his body. A strong sense of familiarity surged throughout Sudbai's body. For Sudbai, it was a feeling imprinted in his bones. Of course, along with it, there was actually something called despair. But this time, the scene in his memory was obviously not reappeared, because Sudbai saw that outside the glass, there were 8 identical containers, and there were people inside. However, because the glass blocked light and perception, Sudbai could only vaguely see a figure, but in fact I couldn't tell whether it was a man or a woman. How is this going? Isn't it the story world of Zhao's villa? Why does it appear here? From Sudbai's first point of view, this place is completely different from the so-called villa. It is more like a high-end human biochemical laboratory, and the 9 people including himself are the guinea pigs in this laboratory. Sudbai believed that he was definitely not the only one who had this idea at this time. But soon, on the glass in front of him, a light curtain appeared. The first question above. Name. What does it mean? Sudbai hesitated for a moment. He needed some time to think about the current environment. But it seems that because Sudbai did not answer the question in time, a countdown began to appear. After 10 seconds, the default name will be used, Sudbai. In an instant, a look of understanding appeared in Sudbai's eyes. This was a game, and Zhao's villa was a game scene. Now, the 9 listeners should be preparing to enter with another identity under the arrangement of the broadcast. This game. Of course, you can't use your real name, otherwise it would be equivalent to exposing yourself in advance. Yi Wang. Sudbai gave himself this name. The word Wang Yi immediately appeared in the name column. This should be the same as Sudbai's mind, so there will be no homonym typos. Gender: male. Now, create an image of yourself in your mind. This is equivalent to a character simulation standalone game giving you the opportunity to create a character when you open a new game. Su Yuhang's figure appeared in Yu Sudbai's mind, and he was not afraid of being discovered. After all, only the big guys might know Su Yuhang's identity a little bit, and Sudbai was sure that the audience who participated in this story world this time there shouldn't be a boss-level audience, and to a certain extent, Su Yuhang's appearance is in line with part of Sudbai's aesthetics. Otherwise, he can't let Sudbai make himself look like Zhang Bai, right? After a while, Su Yuhang's image appeared in the light curtain, and he was also dressed in matching clothes. Next, the profession begins to be automatically generated. This is not something Sudbai can choose. It seems to be a deliberate assignment. This may also be a coercive method reserved by the broadcast for the development of the next story. Otherwise, everyone will choose to be the one. Soldiers might choose professions like killers and desperados. Wouldn't it be a mess? Occupation: doctor. Age: 35 years old. Below is another series of extremely detailed information about aura, family background, etc. at the end. A few simple lines of words appeared on the light screen. Start the introduction of consciousness. Immediately, Sudbai in the glass container felt his eyes go dark. When the light came again, Sudbai felt a continuous shaking. When he opened his eyes, he found that he was sitting in the driver's seat of a jeep, and the car crashed directly into the tree on the side of the mountain road. Normally, Sudbai wouldn't have cared about the car getting into a car accident, but this time, for some unknown reason, when the car was about to hit him, he suddenly felt a strong sense of crisis in his heart. He immediately stepped on the brakes and turned left. Killed the steering wheel. Squeak. The wheels of the jeep made a harsh friction sound with the ground, but fortunately the car did not hit a tree, but passed by in an extremely thrilling way and stopped in the middle of the mountain road. Sudbai looked around. There was a first aid box on his passenger seat. He opened the box, found a surgical knife inside, and then without hesitation cut the edge of the knife across his palm. Hiss. A clear feeling of pain came over me. Immediately afterwards, blood overflowed, but there was no intention of recovering. Really? It is as expected. Then, Sudbai looked at the reflector again and saw a face belonging to Su Yuhang. Sudbai knew clearly that this was a setting made by broadcast for the balance of the game. At this time, everyone should be equal. Previous strength basically does not count here. Everyone is a puppet image made by himself, but he controls it himself. But Sudbai didn't understand. Could it be that the death of the character everyone set also meant that the body in the laboratory also died? If you play it this way, what is the meaning of the reinforcement before the broadcast and all the efforts that everyone has made before? No, that's not right. Sudbai's thoughts began to spread. If the broadcaster simply wants to pursue this balance, there is no need to do anything extra. He can directly seal everyone's strength and change their appearance when entering the story world, and then let everyone appear in the living room of Zhao's villa. There is no need to show up again. A picture of the previous laboratory. This means that the laboratory scene that appeared at the beginning is actually part of the story world. While Sudbai was thinking, he wrapped his wound with gauze. Sudbai was not very used to treating the wound because he hadn't done this kind of thing for a long time. Dong dong dong. At this moment, Sudbai saw a BMW parked behind his jeep, and a Western man in a black suit stepped out. The man walked straight to Sudbai's car and knocked on the passenger seat. Window. Sudbai unlocked the car and the other party got in without hesitation. I'm a lawyer, the other party said. I'm a doctor, Sudbai smiled. Neither of them said anything else, because both parties were very restrained, and the other party's obvious attitude of taking the initiative to get into the car made Subai subconsciously feel that he was someone he knew, most likely Hills. But Subai didn't ask, because the other party looked at him the same way, as if waiting for him, Subai, to speak first. He is testing my identity. He's not Hills. A smile appeared at the corner of Subai's mouth. This was just the beginning, but he was already being tempted. Subai could imagine that once he said the name Hiles, the other party could imagine more things based on this name. As long as the other party knew who Hills was, they could at least guess what Subai's strength was. Advanced listener. In the story world where 9 people participate, Subai doesn't believe that all 9 people are high-level listeners, otherwise it would be too extravagant. Then among these 9 people, high-level listeners are only a minority. For example, now Subai knows that he and Hills are senior listeners, then add an unknown one. If the arrangement is 3 senior listeners and the remaining 6 are all seniors, will the seniors, who have the advantage in numbers and disadvantage in strength, work together first, at least in the future? In this Zhao's villa, where everyone is on an equal footing, first get rid of the high-level listeners. Otherwise, once the mission scene in that laboratory is involved and everyone's strength is restored, the senior audience will undoubtedly have the absolute right to speak, even the power of life and death. Haha, the other party smiled, got out of the car, and returned to his own car. Apparently he also realized that Subai was not fooled by his temptation. A Jeep and a BMW continued to drive on the mountain road, and a chain bridge appeared in front of them. Across the bridge was a semi-independent mountain villa on the edge of the cliff. The car must not be able to drive across. Subai got out of the car and found that there were 7 cars parked on the bridge. It was obviously in the villa. There were already 7 people there. Adding himself and the person just now, there were 9 people in total. Subai walked onto the bridge first, and the lawyer followed Subai. After Subai crossed the bridge, he stood on the edge of the cliff and lit a cigarette. When the lawyer came over, he smiled warmly and asked, "Wait for me, are you so polite?" Subai smiled and said, "Wait until the bridge is broken." The lawyer was stunned for a moment. When he stepped off the bridge, a gust of wind suddenly blew by. The chain bridge, which had just been stable, broke directly, and the Zhao's villa became an isolated island among the cliffs. "It seems that you, my friend, are very familiar with broadcasting habits." The other party was obviously preparing to infer Subai's identity and strength based on this, because the more powerful the listener was, the clearer he was about broadcasting habits. Subai glanced at the other party and said, "You will understand after watching a few more episodes of Conan. The other party was stunned. "I haven't been feeling very well the past few days, and my disordered work schedule has made Long's updates very unstable. I'm going to adjust to the time difference in the past 2 days, so I'll try to finish the next chapter before midnight today." Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao Long. Chapter 820. Detective Conan. The other party smiled, nodded, and said, "Very interesting." Haha. Subai-han glanced meaningfully at the lawyer in a black suit, and walked directly in without saying anything else. The lawyer followed Subai to the villa. Subai's meaningful smile made him confused. It was only when Subai knocked on the door of the entrance that the lawyer woke up. They all chatted in English. From the moment he got in the car, he had always used English. But at the end, when the doctor said the word Conan, he suddenly used it in very formal Chinese. Although both the Chinese Conan and the English translation Conan refer to a person, if you purely follow the pronunciation of Conan, it should be pronounced similar to the tone of, if it is a normal. When Westerners hear the tune Conan, it is difficult for Westerners to immediately think of this cartoon, especially if Conan does not have the prefix detective or detective in front of it. The lawyer gritted his teeth. He knew that the doctor in front of him should have tested out that he was not a Westerner. At first, he wanted to test the doctor, but the doctor inadvertently dug a hole to test out something. The entrance hall was opened from the inside. The person who opened the door was an old man with a rickety face, wearing a butler's uniform, which fit the image of a modern old butler in TV dramas. This made Sudbai pay a little attention. Under the leadership of the old housekeeper, Sudbai and the lawyer walked into the living room. There were many people sitting in the living room. Fortunately, the living room was big enough. Even with 7 people sitting there, it still didn't seem crowded. Yes, there are 7 people sitting in the living room, so this old housekeeper should be an NPC. Among these 7 people, there were 3 with Western faces, 2 women and 1 man, and 4 with Eastern faces, 3 men and 1 woman. Sudbai didn't see any familiar faces, and it was estimated that no one would use familiar faces at this time. The 9 people sat down separately, and no one came to introduce themselves, because everyone knew that the 9 people here all used fake faces and pseudonyms to introduce each other to each other. Everyone looked at the others with some caution. Sudbai looked around and found that no one looked disdainful. There was a violin and a piano in the living room, but no one used them. If in this environment, anyone can sit there and play a beautiful piece of music, it will definitely bring out their own B style, but the end of pretending to be B will be very miserable. Sudbai believed that among these 9 people, there should be at least 3 high-level listeners, but everyone hid themselves. After all, being high-profile when you shouldn't be high-profile is called a brain disease. Ladies and gentlemen, lunch is ready. At the invitation of the old butler, everyone went to the restaurant to dine. The Western food was exquisite and tasted good. After the meal, the old butler gave everyone a house key, which meant that this was the room where the rest of the people rested. In addition, the old housekeeper also said that the cable bridge is broken and it will take about a week before a maintenance team comes over. Because there will be continuous storms starting tonight, it will be difficult for aircraft or vehicles and equipment to go up the mountain to carry out work at this time. Everyone was worried and took their keys to the 2nd floor. The 1st floor had a large dining room, living room, and a large gym, while the 2nd floor was all bedrooms. Sudbai's room number was 201. It was the first room after going up the stairs on the 2nd floor. The location was quite good. After entering the room, Sudbai locked the door with his backhand. He believed that there would be many people who would do this. Taking a deep breath, Sudbai's originally worried face showed a relaxed smile. He opened the window and saw mountains outside. The mountains in the distance were still covered with snow. To be honest, it was beautiful. The scenery here is as good as Josegu, but unfortunately the current situation makes it hard for people to appreciate the scenery. After walking into the bathroom, taking a cold shower, Sudbai lay down on the bed. This story had just begun, and no one even knew the rules of the game, so for the time being, there should be no danger. But whether they were just sitting in the living room or while eating, everyone looked worried. Sudbai knew very well that if ordinary seniors were like this, it would be acceptable. Slightly better seniors and senior. How can people at the listener level fail to grasp the rhythm of radio in the story world? The reason why they all look so worried is simply because they are afraid of being seen by others. Hidden clumsiness. Just to hide my clumsiness. However, sleeping at this time is indeed a waste of time. Sudbai first started searching in the closet and bedside table. It turned out that the closet was empty, the bedside table was empty, and there was nothing under the bed. Except for the quilt and pillows on the bed, there was nothing in this room. In fact, there is really nothing left. Sudbai originally thought about whether there would be a dagger placed here so that everyone could use the murder weapon to kill people. Hills should be here, but Sudbai couldn't tell which one was Hills. Although the 2 people initially formed an offensive and defensive alliance, under the premise that there was already a layer of mask protection, whether it was Sudbai or 11 else has no intention of tearing off the disguise of this mask to find another person for the time being. After searching for a while but with no results, Sudbai had to lie back on the bed. He was trying to put himself into the thinking mode of ordinary people. First of all, according to the taste of the broadcast, there were 9 people in an isolated villa without any bloodshed. Something violent or suspenseful is out of the question. But now, the rules of broadcasting have not been fully presented. Therefore, at least from Sudbai's perspective, he has not found a reason to kill. The essence is that he does not have enough profit impulse. Now that I am an ordinary person, how should I operate? It's best to find something to defend yourself. Although Sudbai has a physical strengthening system, but now he is an ordinary person, his melee combat ability is equivalent to that of a retired veteran, maybe even worse, because Sudbai's previous fighting methods are even worse. He prefers close combat, but at that time, he used ordinary people's bodies to fight based on his strong enough body. That kind of fighting method that hurt each other was obviously not suitable. If the opponent has a weapon in his hand, he will definitely be very afraid of it. Arms. After thinking about it, Sudbai opened the door to his room and walked downstairs. Sitting in the living room was a Western woman with brown hair. She looked really beautiful. In fact, among the 9 people, they were all handsome men and beautiful women. Sudbai Suyuhang is also a handsome guy, which is easy to understand. After all, except for a few who have unique tastes in playing games, most people like to make their characters look prettier. And if you don't make it so beautiful and handsome at this time, it will attract other people's attention. Just like a handsome guy among a lot of ordinary people and an ugly guy among a group of handsome guys, they are all conspicuous. The woman was reading a book. When Sudbai came down, she just glanced at Sudbai without any intention of chatting. Sudbai walked into the kitchen. The kitchen is filled with all kinds of fruits and vegetables. I opened the refrigerator and took a look. There are also drinks and fresh milk in it. In short, I don't have to worry about eating or drinking. When Sudbai walked to the desk and reached for a kitchen knife, he found that in the container where the kitchen knives were placed, there were only 5 left where 7 kitchen knives should have been. This means that 2 people have already used kitchen knives as self-defense weapons. Sudbai smiled, reached for a narrow kitchen knife and put it in the inner pocket of his clothes. Afterwards, Sudbai returned to the bedroom. In the evening, the old housekeeper called everyone to come down for dinner, and then everyone returned to their respective rooms. That night, Sudbai slept very lightly. The next day, the old housekeeper came again to call everyone to have breakfast. All 9 people were there, having breakfast together, then lunch, then dinner, and then the next day. Until dinner on the 4th day, Sudbai was thinking in his heart while eating, no one had died until now. This is indeed true, even high-level listeners would not dare to act rashly in this state. However, the reason is that there is no motive for killing. But it was already the 4th day, and Sudbai didn't believe that the broadcast was really just planning to gather 9 people to eat and drink. If nothing else happened, the broadcast would probably add a motive at this time. Everyone at the dinner table is no longer as indifferent as they were at the beginning, and many people are still chatting with each other. Obviously, they are on guard, but after 4 days, they have become more familiar with each other, and some people are even starting to exercise in the gym. Putting down the tableware, Sudbai walked up the stairs and returned to the room. He was in the room next to the stairs. When Sudbai opened the door, the brown-haired woman who always liked to sit in the living room and read suddenly said quietly, "The radio should be given to there's a motive." Sudbai glanced at the woman, and the woman glanced at Sudbai. The two looked at each other and smiled. Then Sudbai watched the woman walk into the room next to him, and then Sudbai also walked into his room. Really? On the bedside table. There is a blank piece of paper. Are you coming? Motivation. Sudbai locked the door, walked to the bed and took the white paper in his hand. The first person to kill someone will have the authority to ask me something. Sudbai's breath suddenly stagnated. This is the motive for the murder sent over the radio. Subai believed that this note should be placed on the bedside table in every room now. At this moment, the little guy's appearance appeared in Subai's mind. Just kill one person. Just kill one person. At that time, I will know the whereabouts of the little guy from the radio. Subai's eyes began to turn slightly red. Obviously, this motive for murder is enough for Subai. Of course, Subai knew better that this motivation should be applicable to most people. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 821. Subai held the note in his hand and gently rubbed it with his fingers. After the initial excitement, Subai calmed down. After calming down, the first thing that came to mind was this note. Could someone have deliberately put it here to fish in troubled waters? Although theoretically speaking, the probability of this happening should not be high, because the person who placed this note he has no profit motive, that is, he has no motivation to do this. Unless the broadcaster has assigned him a personal task, it is unlikely that the broadcaster will start a small business. Otherwise, once fairness is lost, the story will be meaningless. Just like when Subai almost killed Su Yuhang's father in anger, the radio almost issued a killing order against Subai. Another reason is that the person who plays this way is likely to set himself on fire, because he himself will be the target of attack. However, no matter what, Subai actually planned to take action first. Firstly, because Subai was a high-level audience after all, he had the courage to do so. Even if everyone is now a poor and ordinary person, an ordinary person who has been a king, the mentality of a person and an ordinary person who has been a small boss must be two completely different attitudes. Secondly, Subai really didn't want to let go of this opportunity. Although Subai had already figured it out about the little guy, if the opportunity was placed in front of him, he, as a father, would definitely take the initiative to fight for it. Furthermore, it is much better to take the initiative to kill yourself than to have others kill you. The kitchen knife was still in Subai's hand, but Subai did not intend to use it to kill people. In fact, Subai had placed the kitchen knife on the drawer of his bedside table from the beginning. Using a kitchen knife to kill someone is really a stupid act. Subai went to the kitchen to get a tomato at noon today and saw that there were still 4 kitchen knives left there. This meant that 3 people, including himself, took the kitchen knives. The others must have noticed this, but no one followed up. Of course, the inference of this logic is based on the fact that no one returns the kitchen knife and then someone takes it, or the person in front of Subai takes 2 kitchen knives. The 9 people here are not fuel-efficient lamps. No one continues to get the kitchen knife. It is very likely that the identities of the 3 people who took the kitchen knife have been fixed. In this semi-enclosed space, kill first, and then do what you want. What? A smile appeared on Subai's lips. After killing someone, everyone was trapped here anyway, so it was obvious that they were looking for the murderer. Therefore, killing someone with a kitchen knife is tantamount to exposing one's identity. It has to be said that at this time, Subai's experience and advanced listeners' understanding of broadcasting helped Subai a lot at this time, which allowed him to predict the rules of the broadcasting game and follow up actions in advance to the greatest extent possible. So, if you don't use a kitchen knife, what can you use to kill people? Subai took out a piece of piano wire from his pocket. Piano wire is a piano string. The piano is a percussion instrument. It does have strings and is very strong. It is said that it was used as a military assassination tool at a certain period. The higher strings are it is so thin that it can indeed cut off human skin easily. Subai was very secretive when he picked up the string, and no one had played the piano in the living room until now, so there was no need to worry about being discovered. Even if someone deduced the murder weapon afterwards, everyone would have the opportunity to pick it up, at least compared with using a kitchen knife, the probability of being discovered is much smaller. Subai gently opened his door. At this time, all the residents on this floor had closed their doors. Subai was not sure if they had the same note on their desks that he just read. But Subai didn't need to know clearly, because standing at the stairs in front of his door, Subai could clearly see that the woman who liked to sit in the living room and read a book actually appeared there again. Didn't that woman just go back to her bedroom? What was she doing when she came out again? Subai frowned slightly. The woman entered the room and came out so quickly to continue reading. If she saw the note, it meant that the woman had made her own judgment and choice in a very short period of time. Even faster than Subai. This gave Subai a vague feeling of fear. In this place, appearance and identity were fake, but some things couldn't be fake, such as mentality. Obviously, this woman's mentality is terrible, which also reflects the strength of this woman from the side. The woman who was half lying on the sofa in the living room reading a book seemed to notice that someone was looking at her. She raised her head and looked towards the stairs, meeting Subai's eyes. A meaningful smile appeared on the two people's faces at the same time. This time their eyes met. Subai knew that his plan to actively kill people had been shelved. Because of the location of his room, if he turned around at this time, if you go deeper, your actions will undoubtedly be half exposed to the sight of this blonde-haired woman. Now that he has done nothing, it is better to say that once he kills someone, and then this woman comes out to correct him, it will be an unreasonable disaster for Subai, because once he kills someone, and the radio broadcasts according to what he said, as the inference goes, if the survivors are to find the murderer, that woman will undoubtedly become his biggest weakness. Because Subai knew the urinary nature of radio. In order to increase the tense and exciting atmosphere, radio would give the murderer enough motivation to kill. At the same time, radio should also give the survivors the stimulation to find the murderer. For example, if the murderer is not found in the end, if the murderer or the murderer confirmed by most people is not the real murderer, then it is very likely that everyone except the murderer will be punished by the broadcast. This is a bit like werewolf killing, but the rules of werewolf killing are different. However, Subai did not go back to his room. Instead, he walked down the stairs, went directly to the living room, and sat down next to the brown-haired woman. "What are you reading?" If you don't count the woman's initiative to speak when he entered the room before, this should be regarded as Subai's first formal conversation with this woman. "Murder on the Orient Express." The brown-haired woman pointed to the bookshelf behind the sofa. "The back is full of murder cases and files. I even wonder if this is a broadcast study room." The woman was joking, but when Subai glanced at the bookshelf, he found that the woman's joke was really not funny at all, because in addition to suspenseful murder novels, there were various case files on the bookshelf. Here are English and Chinese versions. There are even versions in various other languages. The reason is very simple. The cases occurred in different countries. If you read the translated files, you may miss some information, and even some information may be missed due to the translator's fault. Details are blurred. Subai chose a book called Silver Serial Murder Case and pulled it out. The printing time of this book was unknown, and it was not even marked by the publisher. It looked like a pirated privately printed work, but the paper and cover were extremely excellent. Flicking through the book casually, Subai found that about 3/4 of the first part was an introduction to the subcases of the case, but at the end, there were statements that even sealed the case. In the concluding remarks, the author analyzed it was the murderer who finally chose to be the owner of a small supermarket incognito. While enjoying the thrill of escaping from the law, he tried to spend the rest of his life in fear. Even talking in his sleep became a taboo for him. At the same time, the back of the book also deduces the time when the murderer was arrested. The author is very sure that the murderer made a mistake of the times. That is, with the development of biotechnology, A DNA technology that is more terrifying than simply identifying fingerprints is PCR. The research and development made the author's hiding completely fall into a joke with no secret at all, because the murderer left a large amount of his own and blood from the fight at the time. The author's speculation is that as long as he waits with the popularization of DNA technology and the inclusion of domestic DNA information databases reaching a certain scale, the murderer will be caught sooner or later, because even if the murderer can control himself, he cannot control people who are related to him by blood. Sudbai suddenly thought that in the story world of Silver serial murder case that he had experienced, the murderer later became the audience and entered the story world, and the murderer deliberately protected himself in this story world and at the same time gave that person a sum of money allowed him to find a place to hide and open a small supermarket. There seems to be a subtle connection between the two. If you think about it as a story world, it is obvious that broadcasters sometimes like to think about some unsolved cases in this world for thousands of years from the perspective of a third party. Of course, from the perspective of broadcasting, it is extremely difficult to find the murderer. Maybe the reason why broadcasting does this is to get some inspiration from these unsolved cases. Taking a deep breath, Sudbai chose another book and sat back on the sofa. The night is very quiet, but also depressing, because at this time, everyone in this villa should have their own agenda. It can even be said that they have their own murderous intentions. Because of this, the scholarly tranquility in the living room, which belonged only to Sudbai and this brown-haired woman, was made particularly strange. "Can you play the piano?" the brown-haired woman asked Sudbai. Sudbai was non-committal. "According to you Chinese people, the situation is over now, so sir, if you play a piece of music at this time, it shouldn't arouse any suspicion or special attention." Sudbai smiled, stood up and sat in front of the piano. Although he had a string in his pocket, playing a piece of music was not a big problem as long as he paid attention. But when Sudbai's fingers just pressed down, he suddenly noticed something strange. Then, Sudbai pressed several keys in succession, but there was still no sound. Sudbai immediately stood up and opened the piano cover. A corpse whose whole body was pierced by piano wires was lying inside, with eyes full of horror. Sudbai immediately turned his head to look at the woman with brown hair, only to find that the woman with brown hair was also standing behind Sudbai with a look of shock on her face. Wasn't she the one who did it? Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 822. The dead person was discovered just like that. Sudbai's first reaction was that this woman with brown hair was the murderer, because she entered the room so quickly and read the note, and then came out and returned to the living room to continue reading. It seemed very strange and she actually suggested that she play a piece of music, and then there was a corpse hidden in the piano. And now, there is a piano wire hidden in her pocket. If this woman waits for others to come down, and then asks others to search her body, and everyone discovers the piano wire, then Sudbai will undoubtedly be the biggest suspect. But what made Sudbai find it most unreasonable was that if all this was done by this woman with rice dumpling hair, and her purpose of doing this was to make herself take the blame after killing people, it seemed a little too deliberate. Because Sudbai will not admit that he is a murderer, and he will definitely bite this brown-haired woman. If this brown-haired woman is the murderer, in the end it will definitely become a PK between Sudbai and this brown-haired woman, even if she is the biggest suspect, but once she is made the focus of attention, it is really difficult to say who the murderer will be. If she is the murderer, she really shouldn't put herself in such an obvious position. At this moment, the old housekeeper walked out of nowhere. He seemed not surprised by the corpse. He walked directly to the stairs and shouted, "Dead people!" The old housekeeper's voice was low and hoarse, but for some reason, it had extremely powerful penetrating power. Sudbai knew that the old housekeeper actually played the role of a host here. Maybe when the murderer was killing, he stood next to the murderer and watched, not helping, but he was indeed observing, but he would not stop it. He would only watch quietly. According to the situation of the previous 4 days, he was only responsible for everyone's food. Of course, now that someone died, he was also responsible for presiding over another matter, finding the murderer. The old butler didn't use a speaker, but the sound was extremely penetrating, and at this time, no one was really so generous that he could sleep soundly. No matter how strong you were just an ordinary person here. In the past, no matter how awesome you are, you can't be awesome now. 6 people came down from upstairs, and everyone gathered around the piano and began to observe the body. The murderer should be among the 8 of you. You can come to my place to vote for the person you think is the murderer. The person with the most votes will be recognized as the recommended murderer. If the recommended murderer is indeed the murderer, then the person dies. If the proposed murderer is not the real murderer, then everyone except the murderer will be punished. What will be the punishment? The person who asked was the lawyer Sudbai met when he first entered the story world. It's a secret, but this punishment may very well lead to death, the old housekeeper replied. This is really an exciting game, Sudbai thought in his heart, but it was a pity that someone killed someone before him. This was equivalent to robbing him of his opportunity. Compared with being a pursuer, Sudbai still he is used to being a hidden murderer. The reason is very simple. The benefit of finding the murderer is to avoid punishment, but there is a reward for being the murderer and not being found. Which one is higher and which one is lower is clear at a glance. 8 people checked the piano and the body one by one. No one moved the body out of the piano. Everyone just checked it and then sat down on the sofa. Now that the rules of the game have emerged, I think there is no need to hide our identities. At least for now, among the 8 of us, one is the murderer, but the other 7 will be punished if we don't find that one. Punishment, I think stating who you really are and your level of power in the real world helps us discern some things. The person who spoke was an Oriental man. He was relatively tall and looked very tough. This time the deceased was a Western man who looked a bit like Justin Bieber and was slightly thinner, so he could be killed and folded and placed in the piano. The piano wires passed through him, but not through it. The body was surrounding him, and he wore only clothes. He must have died of suffocation, and there were no external wounds, so Sudbai, who had played the piano before, did not smell the smell of blood. Then how do you know that the real murderer will tell the truth? The person who spoke was the woman with brown hair. She glanced at the man and said directly, since we can't be sure that the real murderer will tell the truth, we might as well choose the most original one. Investigative methods. For example, first find the first witness, and then investigate the suspect. The suspect is the 8 of us here. The old housekeeper is definitely not the murderer. Everyone should know this. Then, we can first determine the time of death and then start dispatching suspects, because this involves the rule that if the real culprit is not found, collective punishment will occur, so there will be no case of someone covering up the real culprit. I propose that I organize this survey. By the way, old housekeeper, when is the deadline for voting? This time tomorrow, the old housekeeper replied. Okay, I understand, the brown-haired woman nodded. Why are you taking the lead? What if you are the murderer? The lawyer asked. Because he and I are the first witnesses, the brown-haired woman pointed at Sudbai, and I can confirm that he is not the murderer. If I can't find the real murderer and don't have enough reasons to convince you, myself, you will be thrown in as the real murderer. When she said this, the others had no objections, but it was not entirely true to say that everyone completely believed her honesty, because everyone was not a child, and it was not uncommon to gamble on mentality. Okay, now we can officially get to know you. I need to know your names. Even if you write a smooth name for me now, it's okay. At the same time, I'm going to talk one by one. My name is Diana. Now I am going to the gym. The others are sitting on the sofa and are not allowed to leave now. Although I don't hold out much hope, I think there may still be some traces or evidence left in the murderer's room, because now you are not superior gods, you are just ordinary murderers. Please supervise each other. You, and your side. Follow the order I just pointed out, and come to my side to record and accept inquiries. I will announce the results and speculations of my investigation to everyone, because although you are all ordinary people, I believe in your wisdom. Diana asked the housekeeper for a pen and paper, and directly named the first person, and then entered the gym. The door of the gym was also closed. No one was able to use their mental power to eavesdrop. She didn't seem to tell us the time of death, a man said. Is it convenient to fabricate alibi? Subai glanced at the other party and could actually guess that Diana was obsessed with detective novels, and with such a skilled process, her identity in reality should be the same as Chuzhou, similar to a criminal police officer, and the fact that the other party dared to bet on herself really proved her confidence in herself. The questioning time was not long, only a quarter of an hour per person. More than an hour later, Subai was called in as the last one. Diana was biting her pen and thinking deeply. When she saw Subai come in, she took the initiative to hand the notebook to Subai. You trust me so much. Subai reached out and took the notebook. Deceased, Simon, male, with a Western face. A. Lucy, female, with a Western face, was sleeping in the room during this time. B. Peak, the lawyer, male, with a Western face, sleeping in the room during this time. C. Muntali, male, with a Western face, was in the gym during this time. D. Diana, female, with a Western face, was reading in the room during this time. E. Zhaorui, female, with an Oriental face, is resting in the room during this time. F. Su Gang, male, with an Oriental face, is in the gym during this time. G. Wang Liang, male, with an Oriental face, was in the swimming pool during this time. H. Chen Ming, male, with an Oriental face, was enjoying the scenery outdoors during this time. I. The I item is blank. Subai picked up the pen and was about to write his own message. However, when Subai wrote Wang Yi, Diana took the notebook back and said, "You don't need to write, you are definitely not the murderer." Trust me so much. Subai suddenly felt a little incredible. Do you still remember what you said when I walked past you when you opened the door to your room after dinner? Diana asked. You and I both think the broadcast should give a motive, because it has been quiet for too long, Subai replied. Yes, you should have seen the motive of the broadcast when you entered the room, so you quickly left the room. Did you intend to kill someone? And because your room was located next to the corridor, I saw you when you came out. It also ruined your plan to kill someone, am I right? This woman is really not simple. Subai nodded. He wanted to kill someone. There was nothing wrong with admitting it. Now he wanted to catch the murderer who had already killed someone. Then you are definitely not the real murderer. Diana Miller squinted at Subai and continued, because your acting skills are not that high, and from the time you went downstairs to sitting next to me to looking for a book when it comes to playing the piano, I don't see any flaws. Of course, do you know what it is that can directly eliminate you from suspicion? What is it? Subai asked. Do you know the time of death of the deceased? Isn't it the time after dinner is over and when I come out? Or maybe it can be said to be the time when you come out and sit on the sofa in the living room. Diana's smile became even weirder and she said, no, the deceased's death time was from 2 to 5 in the afternoon, that is to say, before dinner. The reason why I can directly rule you out as a suspect is because the murderer had already killed someone in the afternoon. There is no need for him to come out after dinner to prepare to kill another person. Don't you find it interesting that your previous motive for the murder has cleared your suspicion in this murder case?